This is Eslane. It's a military naval base in Scotland, and it's best known for being home to the United Kingdom's for nuclear-armed submarines located here. One submarine is always on patrol to provide a constant at-sea deterrent. A recent report found that this area in red, which covers much of the base, is at risk of flooding due to rising sea levels and storm surges. If true, it will make flooding the biggest threat to the UK's national security. Behind me is the home of 4 Vanguard-class submarines. They're armed with thermonuclear warheads, and together, they form the United Kingdom's nuclear deterrent. The UK Ministry of Defence says their purpose is to discourage the most significant dangers to British national security. But the deterrent may be under threat not from an enemy nation or a terrorist group, but from climate change. No environmental disaster touches more people than flooding, and climate change projections indicate it's only going to get worse. Between 2018 at least 255 million people were directly affected by a large flooding event. The proportion of the global population affected by flooding increased by about 20% between 2015. That's 58 to 86 million more people experiencing the devastation of everything they know going underwater. Southeast Asia, home to many low-lying urban areas, has the highest concentration of population exposed to floods by far outside of Asia. The UK is one of the most vulnerable regions, with 6 million people at risk in floods. Infrastructure is at risk. The UK Environment Agency recently stated that even if the country hits its net zero targets by 2050, summer temperatures will get up to 7.4 degrees hotter, rainfall in winter will increase by 59%, and sea level events that used to happen once every century will be expected every year. Instead, the key issue that we all need to face is climate change. And in that sense, it poses the kinds of problems that past politics and past military strategies seem unable to. Paul Dorfman is a senior research fellow at University College, London's Energy Institute, and founder of the Nuclear Consulting Group. He's written a report on the climate impact on the UK nuclear military. All of the models or predictions, all of the analysis, all of the data has really begun to run hot. It's good that people are taking notice when it's bad that this new data is showing us that we really do need to get our act together. According to the report, coastal flooding frequency is estimated to increase by a factor of between 10 and more than 100 in several European locations. One of those locations is Scotland. Its mainland and numerous islands make up more than 1,500 miles of coastline. One small but important stretch of that coastline is located 25 miles northwest of the city of Glasgow. Her Majesty's Naval Base Clyde, located at Farnsley, is the headquarters of the Royal Navy in Scotland, as well as the home port for the UK nuclear deterrent fleet. The base was first used during the Second World War, but it was only when the US and the UK signed a missile systems agreement in the 1960s during the height of the Cold War, that it contained nuclear submarines. So how has the UK nuclear deterrent developed since then? And what is its relevance in today's world? Professor Andrew Fatai is Director of Research for Politics and International Relations at the University of Leicester. By the end of the 1950s, and particularly the 1960s, there was a move, certainly in the UK, to rely much more on submarines as the main way of deploying nuclear weapons, simply because submarines were seen as the most secure and safe way to house them. If you have a nuclear-powered, very quiet nuclear-powered submarine, on patrol hidden in the depths of the ocean somewhere, it is very hard for an adversary to target it, to strike it, to knock it out. Therefore, there is always the risk if somebody attacks you that you can retaliate. I think Faslane in Scotland became a site of choice initially because it would be used by the United States and their submarine force as a base in Europe, but it has a number of very useful natural advantages. It's very deep water. There are a number of different ways to get out to the ocean very quickly, which makes it very hard for any adversary that wants to track or find those submarines to do so. But some believe the force's biggest adversary today is climate change. This is an aerial map of a sea inlet, Coolgary Loch, and Her Majesty's Naval Base Clyde. The blue area is the current water body, but by 2050 this additional area in red would also be below the water level. This would mean that a number of fixed jetty submarine infrastructures, an oil depot, and several other buildings will be below water. Faslane is not the only Royal Navy base under threat. Across Gar Loch is the Royal Navy Armaments Depot Coalport, where they process and store nuclear warheads. Some of the base's support facilities will be exposed to flooding by 2050. And there are more. Sellafield on the Cambrian coast is Europe's largest nuclear site and holds the world's biggest stockpile of untreated nuclear waste. Next-generation nuclear power Dreadnought submarines are being built at a shipyard in Barrow-in-Furness. The naval base Devonport Royal Dockyard is the Navy's sole nuclear repair and refueling facility, and the Recife Dockyard on the east coast of Scotland is primarily used to dismantle and decommission nuclear submarines. The near-term risk is not simply sea level rise with a thing called storm surge, which is when certain atmospheric conditions happen, it makes the sea level itself rise and rush onto the land. The evidence is beginning to come in these places surprisingly vulnerable and will be of no help at all. According to the Global Extreme Sea Level Analysis, the magnitude and frequency of extreme sea levels which cause storm surge and catastrophic flooding has accelerated worldwide. A storm surge is an abnormal rise in water generated by, you guessed it, a storm. And when a storm surge coincides with typical high tides, it can result in huge storm tides reaching up to 20 feet or more. But is this the case for Fastlane, one of the most highly protected areas in the country? I went to Brunel University to meet Dr. Phil Collins, an expert in geology and geotechnical engineering, to find out how serious the threat of flooding is to the naval base. First of all, the storm surge threat is very real. So if you get a large storm coming in, to some extent, the pressure change will cause the sea level to rise up just on its own. But then also the wave action as well can pile water up into shallow water areas like locks. So is a credible risk area, potentially more extreme storms, but almost certainly more storms. You've done some research around that area in the past many years ago. Tell us a little bit about that area, geologically. If you go back 20,000 years or so ago, there was quite a large ice cap sitting on top of Scotland. The weight of that is pushed down on the Earth's crust in the past. And that now is reversing because the ice disappeared. The whole region around Fastlane has been moving upwards. So when those ice sheets disappeared, you get this fairly rapid initial sea level rise. So that sea level is rising, the land is rising, and you get an interaction between the two. Over the recent time, the balance between the land going up and the sea going up has changed. And now the sea level is rising faster than the land, which is something that has worried quite a lot of people because it was assumed that Scotland was going up, and it would be safe, but it isn't. So the predictions are that within the next 100 years or so we've got somewhere between probably about 30 centimeters to up to a meter of sea level rise. In terms of Fastlane itself, the base is built largely on a fairly low-lying area. But it already has quite a lot of existing flood infrastructure. The engineering has taken a very pessimistic view on what might happen. So they engineered earthquakes at a scale that we have very little evidence of earthquakes like that for thousands of years. They're also engineered for tsunami risk and for storm surge risk. Going forward, if sea level does rise by a meter, then that has to be reassessed, because obviously if you've got a meter-high increase in water, and then a storm surge on top, then areas that were safe. And how exposed is climate change the reason for these rising sea levels? So we know a lot of glaciers are melting. But on top of that, we've seen a documented increase in temperature globally over about last 150 years or so, of about 1.5 degrees centigrade. And that some of that heat goes into the ocean and it causes the top of the ocean to expand, the increases of sea level rise. We've got the two factors going on together, and it's climate change. It's not just the UK's military bases that are threatened by rising oceans and storm surges. In the US, the Pentagon predicts there will be a 6-foot rise in global average sea levels. Pentagon has recently reported 79 nuclear military bases will be affected by rising sea levels and frequent flooding. This has played out in real time when the nerve center of the US nuclear deterrent was submerged by floodwater, with recovery of the base cost of over $1 billion. What's the current nuclear threat level? There's a feeling that we're entering into a more dangerous period in our nuclear history. Russia remains, whether it's said officially or not, one of the main reasons for the deterrent capability in the United Kingdom. What's the current feeling around the nuclear deterrent and nuclear weapons? My gut instinct would say, the British public or the UK public, probably split fairly evenly between whether it's a good idea to retain nuclear weapons. And the particular system that we have, Britain, is different to other countries where there is very little open debate about nuclear weapons. And there's virtually nothing in France, in Russia, or China, some extent in the United States. That leads on to something like changing the infrastructure is going to be a political hot potato. Yeah, I mean, it makes it something that is already problematic because of the cost even more. So this would be another significant cost that would have to be borne presumably by the Ministry of Defense. At a time where there are big demands on lots of other conventional warfighting capabilities, this is a Prime Minister decision. It would have to involve a number of other departments as well. It would not be an easy thing to do. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why this problem has not been given a lot of attention, because there's not a very easy one to solve. There was a proposal for a very substantial investment in the infrastructure on site a few years ago. So the likelihood of money being found to invest in either upgrading the existing infrastructure to keep floods out or to replace it with higher grade